So today I'm going to talk about last week's UN vote on Palestine. I'm only going to cover part of everything. There is a much longer article in the description below. It's both on my website and on Substack. So if you're really interested about Palestine and what's going on in that region, I recommend the article. Now, you probably saw the news that the UN had a General Assembly vote, 142 in favor, 10 against, 12 abstaining, which was a vote by the General Assembly that condemned the October 7th, 2023 Hamas attack on Israel, calling for the release of hostages, and urged the establishment of a Palestinian state without Hamas. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to have the final two-state solution. However, this measure is non-binding because it came from the General Assembly, and it has no legal force. And this brings up a very interesting problem with just the world, because there's a difference between political recognition and legal statehood. Palestine is already recognized as a sovereign state by more than 130 countries. Kosovo is recognized by about 100. And the Vatican, the Holy See, is recognized by virtually every state. Yet, inside of the UN, their legal status differs. Both the Vatican and Palestine share non-member observer status. Kosovo remains completely out of the UN. And the crucial difference here is not in meeting some abstract criteria of what is statehood, but it's the geopolitics of the UN Security Council veto. So, what does it take for a country to be legally recognized? The answer isn't straightforward. International law provides one set of criteria, but the UN, it enforces another. There is a serious gap between entities that satisfy the legal definition of statehood and those that achieve political acceptance on the world stage. But in reality, you need that legal acceptance on the world stage. So we've got legality and politics blending. The Montevideo Convention on the Rights and Duties of States from 1933 it lays out a really good framework for what a state is. You need to have a permanent population, you need to have a defined territory, you need to have a government, and you need to have the capacity to enter into relations with other states. Now, the importance here is that it's a declaratory theory of statehood. Under this theory, the entity qualifies as a state, as a nation, sovereign, if it can objectively meet those four criteria. And it's a legal basis. But unfortunately, it's not what the UN enforces. The UN Article 4 says, membership in the United Nations is open to all peace-loving states which accept the obligations contained in the present charter and in the judgment of the organization are able and willing to carry out these obligations. Under Article 4, to become a legal nation, a state must apply for membership. And then on the Security Council, it must get both 9 yeses, and none of the P5 can veto. And after that, if it's recommended by the Security Council, the application goes to the General Assembly, where a 2/3 majority is required for admission. Now, as you see, Palestine would meet all of these conditions, except the United States will use its permanent veto to block. And this creates a very large problem between law and politics. For some reason, the United Nations is the de facto global benchmark for legal statehood. Back in 1988, Palestine declared statehood, and it's been recognized by 130 UN member states. And Resolution 6719 upgraded Palestine to non-member observer state, which means they can take part in the International Criminal Court. The UN recognizes their ability to sign and ratify treaties, and it can act as a state in parts of international legal order, but it is unable to cast votes in the General Assembly, and it cannot get a seat on the Security Council. It's never up for rotation. Basically, Palestine has partial legitimacy, a state in the eyes of most of the world, but without full legal standing in the institution of the UN, which is what matters most. Now, the United States, as recently as April 2024, vetoed Palestine's admission into the UN. The United States continues to state Palestine's borders aren't resolved. Israel is occupying East Jerusalem. It's in the West Bank. And Gaza remains under Hamas's de facto control. This is a political powder keg because Israel was admitted to the UN in 1949, despite the fact that it had contested and unsettled borders. But the reason why Israel got in is because both the United States and at the time the Soviet Union voted to let them in, and none of the other three members of the P5 vetoed. Basically, both of the world superpowers said, we want Israel to be a nation, so Israel became a nation. The issue here is that, do you need to be a legal entity in the eyes of the UN to be a state? And unfortunately, the answer is kind of yes, but kind of no. It kind of depends who your allies are. Nobody doubts the Vatican is a state. Nobody doubts the Vatican is sovereign. When it comes to Kosovo, Kosovo has 100 allies, the largest of which is the United States. And despite the recognition, Kosovo doesn't bother to try to become a country legally in the eyes of the UN because both Russia and China will veto it. So Kosovo is the mirror image of Palestine, but they're operating just fine without the statehood. Now, as far as last week's non-binding resolution, yeah, it's symbolic. It demonstrates overwhelming global support for Palestinian statehood. It condemns Hamas and strengthens calls for hostages to be released. It places pressure on Israel and the United States. But it changes nothing legally. Non-binding resolutions cannot override the UN's charter. And this veto power remains decisive. Maybe it's time for the UN to pass new rules, or maybe we recognize the UN isn't really effective. I mean, think about the UN for a moment. Israel is able to wage war on the Gaza Strip, bomb Qatar, bomb Lebanon, bomb Syria, bomb Libya, bomb Iran, and the UN can't take any actions against Israel because the United States would veto. Russia is allowed to annex Crimea, annex parts of Georgia, invade Ukraine, and the UN can't do anything to stop Russia because that would require a Security Council vote, and Russia and China would both veto. Are we at a point where the UN is useless? Does Palestine deserve statehood even if the United States continues to veto? Again, there is a much larger article in the description below if you want to read and get smart on some of the background. And you have your choice on my website or on Substack. If you want to leave comments, you'll have to do it on Substack. I'll see you guys next time.